So thank you for coming to tonight's lecture. I didn't expect a little bit of rain tonight, but thank you all for coming out. It's a great pleasure to introduce Yaniv Erlich. He came after an interesting career in Israel, as most people who grew up in Israel had to go into the military, which he did. He graduated from university there and then came to Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory to be a graduate student. And I think he set the bar for being graduate students at Cold Spring Harbor. Apologise to the current graduate students, but there is a high bar there for that Yaniv set. He won a very prestigious national graduate student award called the Harold Weintraub Award when he was a graduate student here. And then he went straight on to become a faculty member at MIT at the Whitehead Institute, which is another unusual step. Without having to go and do a regular postdoc. And then he moved back to New York and came to the New York Genome Center and to Columbia University, computer science, and worked there for a number of years. And he'll tell you about some of the things that he started there. And then most recently, he's moved to Israel and he's the chief science officer, I guess, for MyHeritage, which is the kind of European ancestry.com. And Yaniv has had an amazing career. When he was a graduate student here, he was working on one thing, but on the side, he developed some really cool computer programs like DNA Sudoku, which was really cool. And then when he was at the New York Genome Center, he started studying, or even at MIT, started looking at genetic databases and kind of really looking at public information about genetics, and he'll tell you about that. And this has led him, actually, at a relatively young age, to be probably the world's expert on genetic privacy. Of course, DNA is all over the place these days, and you can't get away from analyzing DNA in ancestry, in crimes, in human genetics. It's in the front page of major newspapers almost every day these days. And so I think it's fantastic that we're able to have Yaniv come back to talk to our graduate students, but also to give a public lecture. And he's going to talk on genetic privacy, friend or foe. So thank you, Yaniv.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yep. Excellent. Maybe we can just dim the lights a bit so you can see the slides. Perfect. Okay, it's always a great pleasure to come back to Cold Spring Harbor. This is the place where I started. Actually, I started here as an undergraduate research, the undergraduate research program, like 11 years ago or so. So this place really gave me the tools for my scientific careers and build a foundation. I'm always be grateful for this place and for the opportunity. So today we're going to talk about kind of like this interplay between genetic privacy and the utility of data sets. And the reason I'm so interested in this subject goes back to the days that I was an undergraduate student. And in that days, I worked in a computer security company. And we used to be invited by credit card services and banks and other types of financial entities to conduct vulnerability research, basically to scan the robustness of their systems, to find exploits and to hack and see kind of like if we can get the money basically from these banks. And what I'm going to show you is one of my favorite hacks. So what you see over here, this is the door to the IT department of a major bank in Israel. This door is controlled by a fingerprint reader over here, but also by an intercom, a very simple device. You press on the button, it calls the secretary, and if he or she knows you, they will press 8, and the door will open. Currently, it is 10 p.m. There is no secretary in the building. What I'm going to show you that each one of you can open this door in 5 seconds using your own smartphone just by dialing the sound 8 to the microphone from the outside. Let's see how it works. So we're calling to the secretary. No one is there. Dialing 8 and taking the money. basically. Don't try this at home. Okay, now, so this is kind of like, quite interesting. And when I work on genetic privacy, I realized, the banks, this was an easy problem. Much easier than when you work on genetic privacy and try to protect data. And there are several reasons for that. So the first challenge that we have, so basically genetic privacy is more complicated than protecting bank accounts. Okay, so what's the first challenge? The first challenge is that we need to share genetic information in order to advance biomedical research. Here is an example over here. You see this young girl over here. She was presented to my group a few years ago. She suffered from hemifacial microsoma. You see there is a strong asymmetry in her face. There is also absence of the earlobe. It's a bit hard to see it on this photo. And this poor thing also developed medulloblastoma during the course of the study. And we really wanted to help her, so we sequenced her exome, basically all the coding regions in her DNA, and we were able to find the etiological gene because we were able to compare her genome to the genome of thousands of healthy individuals that just donated their data for science. If we just had their genome, we would never be able to pinpoint the mutation that caused this condition. But this comparison, by looking kind of like the difference between healthy individuals and her, we could really help her and her family. So these people, these healthy individuals that just wanted to help science, really helped to save the life of this kid. And in fact, she's in remission, she's doing great now. And so we're really able to help her. So that's one thing to keep remembering, that there are not some other people, some human on Mars, that we can use their genome. If we don't share our genetic information with science, there is no way that we can advance scientific studies and we can seize the genetic revolution. But it doesn't only stop with medical genetics. Also, there are things related to identity. And so Bruce already said that I'm part of MyHeritage. The MyHeritage sells in Europe, but we also sell quite a lot in the US, and we have now close to 2 million samples. And we do this basically, this similar test to what Ancestry and 23andMe does. We have a strong focus on genealogy in our company, so we can connect people, we can connect families together. And I want to tell you a short story about this person over here. His name is Dotan. He lives in Israel, a few blocks from where I live. Dotan is an adoptee from Brazil. He was adopted in Brazil in the late 80s, came to Israel, and now he was about 24, 25 years old. He wanted to go back and find who is his family, his biological family, who is his mother. He went back to Brazil, took his all the paperwork that he had, and everything there was basically either forged or just incorrect, missing details. He went to the hospital where he was supposed to be born, in a small town. They told him there was not a single baby that was born the day that you have your birth certificate. And the amount of psychological pressure that a person like that, in his journey to understand where he came has, it consumes so much. It created such a strong psychological toll on Dotan. And he tested with FTDNA about 4 years ago. I told him last April, you should bring your data to MyHeritage. Why don't you upload your results to MyHeritage and you can find relatives? And he did that, and miraculously, he was able to find a week later his half-sister that at the same time uploaded her DNA results, and she's also an adoptee, and she lives in New Zealand, and they found each other. And this is the first time for these two individuals that they got a real piece of information about where they came from. And how they can do that? Because we share DNA together. Now, I have a personal connection to Dotan. In fact, he's my first cousin, and this is our Rosh Hashanah dinner over here. So I was able, I was the hero of my family, that I was able to help my first cousin to get and find his half-sister. So we need to share information. We need to let people somehow to share this information. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is that protecting genetic data is quite complicated. So here is an example from Cold Spring Harbor. So Jim sequenced his entire genome about a decade ago. This was the first human genome that was sequenced of a full person. And he decided at that time that he didn't want to share the ApoE region of his genome. ApoE is a place that encodes basically if you have a certain combination of alleles, you have higher risk for Alzheimer. He decided he doesn't want to know about the status of ApoE, he doesn't want to share it with the rest of the world, which is perfectly fine. Now, researchers showed that you can actually, so what he did basically was basically from his genome, it was an area that was not published, a tiny area of this gene. But smart researchers from Australia showed that you can restore this area. Of course, they didn't do it for his genome, but they took the genome of Craig Venter that at that time was also published, and they showed that if they cut the same area from the genome of Craig Venter, they can restore it back. How this magic works. So without going into mathematical details, you see this sentence over here? Okay, probably you don't want to see this sentence, but okay. So in this sentence over here, you were able to quickly, I put this sentence, a second later you could complete the sentence. But wait, how could your brain could complete the sentence where so many words, so many letters are missing here? Why? Because you have kind of like a mental vocabulary in English. You know that there is some covariance between letters. Certain letters cannot come twice and things like that. So very quickly, you can go and complete the words and get the sentence correctly. The same thing in the ApoE region over here. If we let the computer look at many, many genomes of people where we do have this ApoE region, we've all kind of like, let me backtrack for a second. Think about this missing area the same way as these missing letters over here. But since kind of like we have the letters from the sides and we saw so many genomes, we have a mental vocabulary now of genomes, we can go back and complete back the status of this ApoE. So this thing, just again, to show you that it's quite complicated, even for it, and this was done by a group, the genome of Jim Watson, by a group of highly accomplished geneticists, to get it right. It's more complicated than normal data that we try to hide. So that's the second challenge. The third challenge I want to discuss, and this is kind of like we talked about technical challenges, we talked about kind of like the need to share data for society, but now kind of like a more maybe ethical challenge that we have. The third challenge is that when you share your genome, whatever you decide, remember your genome, also your family members share half of your genome if it's a first-degree relative. So in a way, you take a decision for your first-degree relative. You also take some decision for your second-degree relative because you share a little bit less, and also for other relatives as well. So do you think that we should consult our relatives before we share our genome? Is that something that we should do? Now here is the complication. Maybe I'm not sure what you think, but let's kind of like think about it from a different angle, totally different angle. Okay? Let's backtrack from genomics for a second and think about something totally different. This is an activist from Tunisia, and she decided that she wants to share nude photos of herself to protest for female rights in Tunisia. Now, her decision created for a family some consequences. The same way, when you share your genome, it can create consequences for your family. Now, in a liberal society, if we kind of like believe in the autonomy of individuals about their body, for sure she has any right to share her nude photos if she wants to. Should not like be the business of her family. So why do we even think that we should consult our family members before we share our genome? Is genome somehow exceptional compared to other parts of our body? That's something that I really hope that we can discuss during the Q&A. So I kind of like started this talk by really complicating things, and just kind of like this is why the title was A Friend or Foe, right? It's not clear-cut. It's not about, this is not a talk that tells you, don't share your data, just hold it to yourself or something like that. What I try to do here is kind of like to tell you there are some gaps in genetic privacy. There are some methods that we can bridge those gaps. And the point is kind of like to put all the information to you, and then in the Q&A have some discussion together, because this is not a decision by me or by anyone else. It's something that we as a society, we need to figure it out together. Okay, so tonight we're going to have two stories. The first story, I'm going to show you how we can recover the surname of individuals from their genomic data. I just look at their genome. If they are males, I will show you how we can infer the surname of the person. The second part, I will show you how we can have a different technique, and by looking for family members or by relatives in databases, we can find individuals, and this technique was recently conducted on the Golden State Killer, and I will talk more about this case. So these are the two kind of like technical stories that we're going to discuss tonight. Okay. So we know for over a decade, for 20 years maybe, that there is a correlation between surnames and DNA. For example, here we have the Smith family. Now let's say the Smith family, happy family, they have a son. So they give this, this son is going to get the Y chromosome from his father, and in most Western societies, he will get the surname. Now, if this son is getting married and also have a son, he will give him his surname and Y chromosome. And now you see this process continues over and over. This creates a correlation between Y chromosome and surnames. Some genetic genealogy companies, not MyHeritage, but other companies allow you to actually, they will send you a swab to sample the DNA in your inner cheek, send it to the company, and then they will genotype a series of short tandem repeats, or in short, STRs, it's an acronym. What are these STRs? These are repetitive markers in the DNA that look like AC, 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 AC. Maybe I have like 10 ACs in my Y chromosome and Bruce has 12. They will genotype, they will measure those markers and put them in an internet database together with your, so kind of like the results and your surname. What you see over here are my own test results. Why do people do these tests? Because it's a lot of fun. You can connect with your patrilineal relatives, learn about your past. I learned that I'm a Cohen, not just like oral tradition, but also based on my DNA. Super fun. Find a black sheep in your family. All of this based on these tests, right? Now we thought about this test and we said, maybe we can use the same technique to infer the surnames of individuals that we just have their anonymous DNA. Okay, how are we going to do that? We have an algorithm, recipe. We have 3 steps in our algorithm. The first step, we're going to genotype this STRs marker on the Y chromosome. Then we're going to infer the surname, and then we will try to add more information to get from the surname to the individual. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so step number 1, how we process these STRs from the Y chromosome. So we invented an also kind of like, remember, we need to get these markers from the Y chromosome. They are a bit difficult to get because they are repetitive. It's some difficult bioinformatic task. But about a few years ago, we published this algorithm called Lobster. It's a kosher lobster, by the way. And that this algorithm allows you to infer the length of these STRs from whole genome sequencing data. Just to show you that it works, here is the results that Lobster reports for different STRs in the genome, where 0 is the wild type allele, is the most common allele in the population. And here is the gold standard using capillary electrophoresis, which is kind of like a very robust technique. And we can get very nicely these STRs. So first step of the algorithm, check. Okay, now can we recover the can we recover the surnames of individuals? We focused on 2 databases, basically, smgf.org and ysearch.org. Both of them were public at the time we conducted the study. And together they had 140,000 publicly accessible records of Y chromosome data and surnames. Now, interestingly, if you look at the composition of records in these databases, here is the number of records in the databases for kind of like the number of Y chromosomes that you have for each surname, and here is the percentage of the surname in the US Census. There is a very nice correlation between the 2 things. So Smith is over here. We have many records for the Smith family, and of course, this is the most common surname in the US. Then we have Johnson, Williams, Brown, Jones, and so on, all the surnames. So the databases kind of like have good sampling or good description of the US population in general. Okay, so how do we find a surname? So let's think about it for a moment. What we can do, we can take the Y chromosome of the person of interest, the one that we don't know, and compare it to each record in the database. And then we can measure using these STR markers. We can do it kind of like what we do in evolution. We try to estimate the time that elapsed between the record and the sample of interest. So in some cases, I am going to take a record from the database and I look at the Y chromosome and I say, these 2 Y chromosomes, they go back in time. The common ancestor lived the time of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks or something. They don't share the same surname. They didn't have a surname at that time. So okay, that's it. Just before, maybe I just want to emphasize the point. All the males over here in the audience, hello, we all share ancestors on our Y chromosome. So it's one big family tree. We can all trace the Y chromosome into one tree because we got it from our father and got it from his father. And at the end, all these branches, they coalesce into kind of like different points. So we can do this process with any pair of Y chromosomes. So again, so if we find like 2 people, let's say me and Bruce, we have our Y chromosome traces back to the ancient Greeks. He's Stillman, I'm Erlich. Nah, we don't share the same surname, obvious. But in some cases, we search the database, and we are lucky enough to find a person that is much closer to the person of interest. Maybe they just share a few, maybe 5, 10 generations ago. That's 250 years. That's after the invention of the surname system. So there is a better chance that these two individuals actually share the surname. And then, based how close they are, we put the surname and we assign it to the person of interest. Okay, so to really show that this thing works, we did the following process. We took an individual, we knew the surname of this individual, and we had the Y-STR, we had the STRs on the Y chromosome of this person. We searched it to databases, we ran our algorithm, we inferred the surname, and we compared to see whether we got it right or wrong. To get some statistics, we ran the same test with 900 different individuals. We also corrected for the different, kind of like the prevalence of different surnames in the US, so we get like even, as if we got even sampling from the US. The results are that for US, and we think that this is for European people with European heritage, we have a 12% chance to recover the surname of the person correctly. Now I think 12% is quite low, but just imagine that the NIH currently tries to build a database of 1 million people. So if I can infer the surname of 100,000 people, that's not going to be a beautiful day for these research subjects. Okay? Okay, so I showed you that we can infer the surname, but can we get to the person, right? Okay, so let's look at this, kind of like how we can go back from a surname now to the individual himself. Oops. Okay, so I want to emphasize that most of the surnames that we recover are not very, very rare and not very, very common. It's very hard to get Smith correctly because there are so many people in Smith, and Smith, you know, the meaning of the surname is a person that works with steel, so or with iron. So this is something that was invented multiple times for multiple families, basically. And it's very hard to get the surname correctly. But for people that are rare enough, not extremely rare, but the surname is rare enough, we can get them correctly. In most of the cases, we can reduce the search space by knowing the surname to only 40,000 males on average. So if we have, right now in the US, something in the order of 150 million males, if I know the surname, I reduce the search space to 40,000 people. But how can I get to a single person? Because that's my goal, right? Okay, how can we do that? What if we know a little bit about some demographic identifiers, such as the age and the state of the person? Now here is the thing, age and state are not considered, according to the HIPAA privacy rule, as protected information. When you go to the pharmacy and you buy a drug or some pills, they are allowed to say, okay, this was purchased by either male or female in New York and your age. Totally okay to collect this information because it's not considered protected health information. Also in genomic databases, in some cases, we know the state and the age as part of in the database. So what we did, we looked at the US Census, and we simulated the following technique. We thought, okay, what's the distribution of ages of males in the US population? How many people live in each state? And we also took the covariance between age and state. In Florida, people are older. We took that into account, just how to show that in a two-dimensional slide. So we picked, let's say, age 40, a person that lives in Colorado, and let's say the surname is Adams. How many people in the US would match such a combination based on these distributions? And what we found is that if, and kind of like we repeated the process, if you know age, state, and surname, you get to a list of 12 individuals most of the time, 12 males or less. At that point, you're really, really close, right? We can just call all these 12 males. Maybe not me, someone with a nice accent will call and, hello, sir, and, you know. And did you participate in the study? And then you can get, by just social engineering, you can get to the person. Okay, so it gets you very close to this individual. Okay, so now you can ask Yaniv, that's very interesting, but you just showed us some simulations and this and hand-waving statistics. Can you show us that it really works, this thing? And the answer is yes. We decided to focus on the genome of Craig Venter that was published just around the same time that Jim Watson's genome was out there. So we took his genome, we downloaded it, it's publicly available. We used Lobster to recover the STR markers on the Y chromosome. And then we went to ysearch.org to the search mechanism, and for each STR that we found, we just put length in this mechanism, the search mechanism. We clicked on the search button, and after a few seconds, we got Venter was the top match compared to all other surnames. So I just showed you how we can get genomic data of someone, and from this data, we can get to the surname of the person. But you can ask, okay, Yaniv, but there are thousands of venters out there. Can you get to Craig Venter? And the answer is yes. Let's say that we know that this person is from California. He was born in 1946. He's a male. And we know that this is Venter. You can go to a website, ussearch.com. It's amazing what is out there on the internet. You just put Venter, age, this, And then what you find quite immediately, 2 matches, one of which our friend, J. Craig Venter. In fact, you can even get like an email address and telephone if you pay $5, but we didn't have budget for that. We just used the free version. And so I just showed you how we can go all the way from a genome of someone, surname, to identify this person. But now you might ask, okay, Yaniv, that's very interesting, but does it work with people that you don't know, right? Venter is like, you knew from the beginning that this is Craig Venter. And the answer is yes. We can also recover anonymous individuals. We focused on the 1,000 Genomes project, which is the flagship project of the NIH. And we focused on 10 genomes, the genomes that represent the US in this project. It's an international project. They are from Utah, and they call the CEU collection. And we took these genomes, we recovered the STRs using Lobster, searched these 2 databases, and got surname predictions. Then we focused on this pedigree over here. Squares are males, circles are females, and we were able to recover the surname of this person, of the paternal grandfather and the maternal grandfather. We got their surname. Then we went to Google, and we did something similar to that. We don't disclose the exact details because we want to respect their privacy, but very similar to that. We put this information in Google, we searched, and we found an obituary. The top link was an obituary of someone that exactly matches this pedigree. What do I mean by that? This person was from Utah. The surname of the father was the surname of the paternal grandfather. The maiden name of the mother was the same surname of the maternal grandfather. The number of kids was exactly the same. And let me tell you, this is not a family of 2.1 kids as the average American. This is a very large family. The birth order of males and females was exactly the same. And this is like flipping a coin multiple times and predicting these coin flips. The ages of some of these individuals, we knew them, was exactly the same as the ages of the people in this obituary. So what are the chances that we got the wrong family? Less than 5 times 10 to the minus 9 if you scan all households in the US, that you'll find a family like that. And then we submitted the manuscript, and we thought, yeah, it's going to be a nice manuscript, right? But then the reviewers told us, just beginner's luck. You guys showed us it works on more families. Okay, now we have to do it again and again. And in all cases, these are people from this public project of the NIH. We're able to find the surnames of these individuals, and by that, recover the identity of all these families with very good probabilities that we got it right. In fact, at that point, we have so much data about these individuals, right? We had Facebook accounts of some of them, photos, everything connected to their genome. We could even build pedigrees and see what is the relationship between the person that donated his data to this Y chromosome database, that fun database, and the person at the NIH. And importantly, these are not the same individuals. It's not that the same person that participated in this NIH project also went to the Y chromosome database. No, it was a far relative of the person that basically by donating the data allowed us to identify the other person. Let me show you here, okay? So here we talk about the second cousin, once removed of this person. He gave his Y chromosome data to this fun project like me, and by that allowed us to identify his second cousin once removed in this NIH project. Here, how do you say it? It's complicated, right? It's something like this niece of the great-great-great-niece or something like that. Here it's a first cousin once removed, and so on. So you see basically what's going on here. You don't need the same person. It's enough that a small number of individuals are in this database of the Y chromosome. And since this information migrates through these deep genealogical ties, they can identify many individuals. How many of you know your second cousin once removed if this person donated his DNA for Y chromosome searches? If this person did that and you are males, you might be identified using the same technique. So using this basically process, we identified 50 CU samples from the 1,000 Genomes project, all the people in black here. We published this result in Science about 5 years ago, and we also got a very nice editorial. Also, we let the NIH know about this project, and they told us, okay, please, before you publish, we want to write some sort of a paper to give perspective about what you did. And this is something very common in computer security. When you discover an exploit, you don't run to the news and say, I found an exploit. You first let the company that it affects, or the entity that it affects, to know about it. You give them some time, some reasonable amount of time to process the data, and then you disclose it to the world, because if you want to promote transparency of this exploit. Same thing here, we went to the NIH, we told them about this project, we let them kind of like process this information, and they wrote this response. And we got very nice publicity basically all over the place to kind of like a lot of public interest in this concept. Okay, so I showed you this thing about the surname inference. And you might say a few things. First you say, some of you, many females over here, they say, I'm fine, yeah, bye-bye guys. And also you think, okay, that's only 12% of the population. It's a sizable number, but it's not like everyone can be identified. Plus also these databases of Y chromosome are discontinued like about a year ago. They're not so popular. People don't think about Y chromosome so much these days. So maybe the risk is not that high. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you how we can use finding regular relatives in genetic databases, such as regular cousins, or to identify individuals. So our story begins with one of the most popular features. So how many of you have taken a DNA test in one of these direct-to-consumer companies? Raise your hand. Okay, so many of you. Okay, so you know that one of the most popular features in genetic genealogy is the ability to find relatives using DNA. How do we do that? If we have here a pair of relatives, in many cases, they will co-inherit chunks of the genomes of their ancestors, and this will create what we call identity by descent segments, or in short, IBD segments. These are stretches of DNA that are identical between these two pairs of relatives. And if we scan the genomes of many people and find places that are identical between two individuals, we can tell them you are related. And we can even calculate how you are related, like if you are second, third, and so on, cousins of each other. Now, this technique is extremely powerful. What you see over here, this is the power to detect various types of cousins. And even for third cousins, it's quite far away. You have more than 85% chance to get them using this technique. So if both of you are in the database, we have third chance, like very good chance that we can actually do this process and meet you with your third cousins. Now this technique is extremely popular. I told you about the story about Dotan. This is exactly the same technique that Dotan used. But also, this is something that, generally in the community, we have success stories from Holocaust survivors that find each other after 70 years. We talk about adoptees that reunite with the biological families, like my cousin, and even just regular genealogists that can now identify a new branch in their family tree that use this technique. So very popular technique. But here is the problem. What happens if you are tested with one company, but your relative is tested with a different company? That sucks, right? Like you will not be able to find each other. Okay, so the genetic genealogy community address this issue by several services now allow individuals to take the raw genetic data from one lab, let's say from 23andMe, and then upload their data to a different database without taking the DNA test. So the data looks like just a text file over here, and we at MyHeritage, we allow users to search our data. We have now about 1.8 million people. GEDmatch allows people to do the same thing with 1 million people, also FTDNA and DNA Land. Every time it's the same technique. You take your raw genetic data, upload it to the websites, they search for relatives, but you don't need to take the DNA test. You save money and you save time. Now, the thing is that the police realized that they can also use these services. And maybe the prime example is the Golden State Killer. So the Golden State Killer is one of the most notorious criminals in the history of the US. We're not going to graphical details, but take your nightmares and a step further. The FBI has been searching for this person for over 40 years with no avail. They had his DNA, but he never showed up in any forensic database. Now, importantly, in forensic databases, because the markers that they use, they can only identify either the person or first-degree relatives. They cannot go to second or third cousins. So about a year ago, the FBI consulted with a genealogist, and she suggested that they will take his DNA, genotype it the same way that we genotype at MyHeritage, like many markers in the genome, and upload the data to GEDmatch. GEDmatch, from all these databases that I mentioned, is the only database that allows, like in the terms of service, allows the police to search the database without a warrant. So they did that, they searched the database, and they found a third cousin of the Golden State Killer. Then they employed a group of genealogists that built a very large family tree. They scanned the different branches, and they found a profile that exactly matched the description of the person they were looking for. They tested the DNA of this individual. It perfectly matched the DNA they had in their hand, and they brought him to justice after 40 years. Now, since then, this technique is so powerful that this was adopted quickly by other law enforcement agencies. I never saw anything like that. And now we have already 19 cases of individuals that were captured using this technique. In one of the recent cases, this person over here, this was not even a cold case. This was an active investigation, which signals us that this technique is becoming mainstream. It's part of regular forensic work. So many kind of like success stories in capturing really bad people. This lady over here, this was an unidentified body that was identified using this technique as well. Okay, so we wanted at MyHeritage to know what is the probability to find a relative using this technique. Are these people, we just won the lottery ticket with them, or this is something that works for each one of you here at the audience? So to calculate this probability, we looked at our data, and we have many people from the US. So we look at 1.28 million individuals in our data. For each person, we looked at all the relatives of the person. Now here is the trick, or not the trick, but the caveat that we had to address. When someone buys a MyHeritage test, in many cases, they also buy for their mother, for their sibling, so they buy for their family as a gift. So we wanted to avoid this kind of like ascertainment bias in our data. So what we did, we said, okay, if you have a match, if you have a genetic relative that is closer than a first cousin, let's exclude this connection from the data. Let's kind of like get rid of this relative and look for all the other more distant people. So we did this analysis, we conducted this analysis, and here is what we found. This is a probability to get at least one match at the MyHeritage data as a level of sharing genetic information. How do you read this graph? This is the probability to get first cousins once removed, second cousins once removed, third cousins, and so on. And I want to point out like this over here, 100 centimorgan, which corresponds to a third cousin. Our data set enriched for individuals with European heritage, and we estimate, using this graph, we have 60% probability to find a third cousin for a person of US individual with European heritage. So 60% of people here from European heritage will have at least a third cousin match the same way that the Golden State Killer had in GEDmatch. To validate these results, we repeated the process with GEDmatch also. We look at 30 different relatives and very similar results, showing that it's quite robust, this type of analysis. Okay, another question you can say, okay, but Yaniv, that's very interesting. But this is with the databases at the current size. What about the future? Everyone is like, no, soon is Christmas. Some of you are going to buy this type of tests. These databases are going to grow exponentially. So how this thing is going to look like in the future? So we developed basically a theoretical model. I will not go into the details, but kind of like a model that allows us to estimate the probability of a match for different sizes of databases. And let me just skip this slide. Okay, so here is the kind of like the end result of this model. The model tells you what's the probability of a match as a function for different types of relatives, from first cousins all the way to fourth cousins, as a function of the database coverage of the population. Currently, we believe that GEDmatch has about, the number of individuals covers about 0.75% of US individuals with European heritage. But soon, 2 or 3 years from now, we'll get to 2%. 2% of the population will be at the GEDmatch database. And at that point, you will get, each person from this ethnic group will have a third cousin match, a GEDmatch. And most individuals in this room will have also a second cousin match, a GEDmatch, much closer search space. So we get to the point that we can do genetic surveillance of nearly every person in the US. Okay, so you might ask, Yaniv, that's very interesting, but then you just showed us that you can get a third cousin match. Can you get to the person? And the same way that we did with these demographic identifiers previously with the surname inference, we can do also here. If you have a third cousin match, you have about 850 individuals that this person could match, or like the search space is 850 people. And then if you just kind of like take geographical data, you know that, let's say, the Golden State Killer lives in North California, and you can estimate it within 100 miles. Plus, if you know the approximated age, you know, you're looking for someone in his 70s, this quickly reduces your search space to 33 individuals. Now we're looking for a male. We have the search space. So if you know something a little bit about the geography, some vague idea about the age, and we know that this is a male, very quickly we get to 16.5 individuals, very small search space, and at this point we can use regular investigative techniques to identify the individual. Okay, so now you might say, Yaniv, everything that you said is like great news. We catch criminals. Yay, what's the problem here? So here is the problem. The problem is that we can use the same technique to identify research subjects. Remember the families I showed you from the Utah population? We took, again, the same family from the Utah population, one of them. We uploaded her data to GEDmatch, and remember, we know her identity because of this previous paper that we published with the surname inference. We uploaded her genome to GEDmatch. We found two matches, one in North Dakota, one in Wyoming. In 1 hour of work with open genealogy, we could build a family tree, basically, for these individuals, and then connect and find her. And this is exactly the same person that we found in the previous study. So now I showed you how we can not just use the Y chromosome searches, we can use regular searches at GEDmatch to identify individuals. Okay. So I want just to maybe, like, the interest of time, skip a few slides. And so kind of like we have this paper that was published in Science about a week ago, and it was also at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, probably you heard about this work, that we showed basically that we reported these results about the ability to create genetic surveillance of large parts of the US population using a tiny database of only 1 million individuals. But I want kind of like now, when I about to conclude my talk, I want to shift gears and tell you that I told you quite a lot about genetic privacy, but I want to have a confession, if I may. I think I don't understand privacy, even though I work on privacy for a long time. And let me give you kind of like a prime example of that. How many of you remember the website Ashley Madison? Okay, just the website, the slogan is "Life is short, have an affair." Now, this website was hacked 3 years ago, and 36 million accounts were compromised. We talk about email addresses, credit cards, badly protected passwords, so you can also recover the passwords of this individual, which is another nightmare, sexual preferences, sexual orientation, being a cheater. That's a nightmare. My genome is out there, right? But this is like really sensitive information. I thought, when I heard about this hack, I thought the internet will not be the same. Kind of like it will be like pre Ashley Madison and after Ashley Madison. And it's not only me, even the New York Times, published this like opinion piece that we're going to see maybe an Ashley Madison recession because of the high divorce rates. In fact, we're going to see probably a higher demand for smaller apartments. And I thought I read that and it's like, I understand privacy. I will buy some apartments and make some money, It's like, great. And here is the brutal truth is that 3 years later, nobody remembers Ashley Madison. In fact, if you look online, Ashley Madison is the top 5,000 website in the US. Now, I wanted the negative, in experiments, we have to do controls, right? So what's the best control for Ashley Madison? Cold Spring Harbor. And I'm sorry, Bruce, you're not popular with Ashley Madison. So here is the thing, right? It's kind of like we talk so much about privacy. No, this whole talk was about privacy. For 40 minutes, I just told you about privacy and the limitations of privacy. When we go back, right, and we see how people, not about their attitudes. You ask people, do you care about your privacy? Well, yeah, of course, I care about my privacy. But then they go home and they use Ashley Madison, and that was hacked already. They use Facebook with Cambridge Analytica and who knows what. And this is the fourth challenge that we have when we deal with privacy, is that privacy in many cases competes with utility. And people, this is at least what we see. They prefer utility on privacy. And with that, I conclude my talk, and I would love to take any questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Yaniv. So if that hasn't been food for thought, nothing else will. But so how about questions?
Yeah, hi, shalom. My question is, how are insurance companies going to be utilizing this data? Because I've heard people saying, don't do genetic testing because you'll never get a life insurance policy because insurance companies are going to mandate genetic testing, or will do it without your knowledge and up your rates.
Yeah. So I think that, first when it comes to you said life insurance, and this is correct. Right now in the US, we have GINA, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which prohibits health insurance companies and employers to use genetic data for their decision, either underwriting decisions or hiring decisions for employers. There was one employer that violated this thing that we know in the public. This was a warehouse in Atlanta. And it's actually a funny story. Maybe I'll just expand that story. It was a warehouse in Atlanta, and someone, how do you say it nicely? Someone was pooping in the warehouse. and they really, they had to throw some grocery. It was it happened again and again, and they couldn't find the person. Then the security officer there, the genius, said, let's genotype the poop. It's insane. So it's like, no, it's a shitty job. They genotype the poop. And then they went to two employees that thought that these are the poopers. And they told them, please sign here that you waive your rights for whatever. And now we want to do, and if you don't take the test, we're going to fire you, but this is your chance to save your position. So they took the test, they compared the results, and it was none of them. But they were smart, and they remembered that there is this thing called GINA. So they went and they sued the company, and this was the first case of GINA, and they were awarded by the court $2.25 million in damages because of this thing. So GINA protects, I think, provides strong protection for health insurance and employment. For life insurance, there is no protection right now. On the other hand, the question is what is fair, right? Because if someone takes a DNA test and knows that, common tests don't provide Huntington information, but for the sake of this argument, let's say now the person is like 35 years old and knows that he's going to suffer from Huntington in a few years. There is some asymmetry in information at that point between this person and the life insurance company or the long care disability. So kind of like the question is what is fair to do here? And I'm not sure that right now that I'm aware of any life insurance company that uses DNA information. But there is, I think, a broader question here of fairness and symmetry of information between insurers and the people that buy the insurance.
Other questions? Well, I might start off with the interesting thing about the obituaries that you mentioned is that there's actually a huge amount of information there. So can you take just obituaries and make a tree that links everybody to everybody else?
Will be quite difficult, although there is a website called findagrave.com that takes not obituaries but the tombstones and try to do the same thing, because in some of them they mention the parents. Another thing that could work that we did, death certificates provide the name of the father and the mother of the person with social security number. We were able to obtain at my academic lab all death certificates in Vermont from 1885 to 2000. The data before that was there was some flood, there was some hurricane, some flood that washed the hard drive. But we got all the data from this death certificates, and you could see exactly who are the parents and so on. Also, what's the cause of death? And this was actually very helpful for different studies, but it's still, I think we are still not there in terms of how to analyze and create pedigrees automatically from these things. On the other hand, we have many genealogists, even here in this room, that do a wonderful job in documenting their family trees in different outlets, and by that we can crowdsource quite large trees.
Karen.
Thanks, Pat. Yaniv, are you able to state a personal opinion about whether or not you think what GEDmatch, the fact that they're open to, police resources or whatever, your personal opinion on that?
Yeah. I would say I'm less concerned about the police. I think the police is like, the misuse is smaller. I'm more concerned about foreign governments using the same technique. Because here is the thing, this website is open to everyone. If you have an internet connection, you can upload data to this website. Now think about it. We showed that in the US, you can get to these genetic surveillance rates that are in the order of 60% of the population currently, and very soon 99% of the population, at least for people of European heritage. What it means is that now think about some covert operation of the US in some foreign country. People would leave their DNA behind because this is what people do. And this creates a strong asymmetry because it means that foreign governments can really now monitor US individuals, but not the opposite. And I think this is a major gap that we have that needs to be addressed. The police, I think, kind of like in the list of things that can go wrong, it's kind of like not my top concern.
Is there standardization of technique from one lab to another? And is there any surveillance of the accuracy of the testing?
Yeah, very good
And what's
question.
the best lab?
Yeah, MyHeritage, of course. There is all the labs, either Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, or FTDNA. We use genotyping arrays by the same company, Illumina. Each lab has its slightly different genotyping array. But remember, I showed you at the beginning of my talk this imputation technique that if you have missing variants, you can put them back. So what we do when we get someone from 23andMe, we can kind of like put the same variants as MyHeritage with very high accuracy and get the same results as if this person was tested with our lab. So basically, there is strong compatibility between the different labs. There is no standard, but what we want now to say enforce, but to introduce, is this notion that when a person obtains his DNA file from a lab, when you download your data from 23andMe, let's say, they will sign your data with a cryptographic signature. Let me show you how it will look like. So basically, this is your file. Let's say this is actually MyHeritage file, but 23andMe file looks very similar. We want to add one line to the file with kind of like a gibberish. Now this line will be produced by the lab and will kind of like, it will be like a seal that will tell you that the data was not tampered and was produced by a valid lab. When GEDmatch gets these files from 23andMe and the signature is valid, they can basically process it as before. But if there is no signature, then maybe it came from a crime lab. Maybe it came from not a direct-to-consumer company, but for some source that is not part of this not a trusted source. So they don't serve this person. This is what we want to introduce to the community to create this method that data custodians can distinguish between regular genealogists and special kind of like crime labs or foreign entities that will try to mimic the direct-to-consumer data sets.
I have a question.
Where are you?
I'm over here.
Hey.
It sounds like so much of it is through the Y chromosome.
That's the first part of the talk. The second part is for the entire autosome.
Okay, so women aren't free of, like, we can't just commit crimes and not be caught.
Yeah, but I like the way you think. Yeah, the Y chromosome only works for males.
Right.
But the second part works through the entire genome, not the Y chromosome.
Okay.
So it works both, and this is when kind of like when we identify this 1,000 genome sample over here. This was a female that we uploaded to GEDmatch, and we got her from these searches.
Okay.
And we deliberately took a female to show that it works also on females and not males. Yes.
Can you pass this one?
I understand that lots of people who are adopted want to find their biological parents. A woman who gives up her baby, her newborn, for adoption, doesn't she have the right not to be found?
That's a very good question. Does she have the right not to be found? So I would refer to the UNICEF Declaration of Human Rights. And in this declaration, Article 8 says that every person has the right for identity from birth. Now, the thing is that when you, and I don't know about any right that says if you give your child for adoption, you should be untraceable. So at least, based on this framework, adopted kids, adoptees, basically have the right to know where they came from. And this is a fundamental, it was recognized by the UN as a human right. Whereas for a person that decided to give her child for adoption, I'm not sure that, that's a very good question. I'm not sure the right for the kid versus her right. At least it seems that, the UN prioritized this part rather than this part. But if you have different opinions, it's actually quite interesting to talk about. There's a question over there.
Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Hi. So I was interested in the last part of your talk when you were kind of defining privacy. And I think one of the most important parts of privacy is that you have a choice and that you can choose to use Facebook, you can choose not to. But if my relatives decide, if they choose to use MyHeritage or any of these other sites, my genetic data is now, a significant part of it is now available, and I didn't make that choice. So could you comment on how relative data is kind of taking away the choice of an individual?
Yeah. This is my personal opinion. First, I would just want to point out that in Facebook, you said that you have the option not to use Facebook. It's much more tricky. I think right now the Facebook has reached the state of a monopoly. And if you are a small business or if you are some political candidate, you cannot say, I'm not using Facebook. It's like either you market through Facebook or you don't have a way to market. But going back to genetic information, it goes to this Tunisian activist, right? Whether she has the right to use her body for whatever reason in a way that can influence her family. Now, the thing also with genetic data is it's very hard to define where it stops. Okay, so you're going to ask your first-degree relatives. Also, if I cannot ask my kids. They're too young to understand. And I cannot, of course, ask my future kids about it, right? Because they're not even born to discuss this thing. And also, where does it stop? We show that third cousins are affected by this technique. I have probably a few hundreds of third cousins. Am I going now to discuss with each one of them? Therefore, this is at least my belief about this thing, is that each individual has full autonomy on his or her DNA and can do whatever they want with it without asking other people, because otherwise it's an endless process, or otherwise it's something that, it's not part of what we think about liberalism. There is some chat here that, yeah.
I think it was Siri.
Okay. Siri is interested to ask questions. That's like a new level. AI is asking you a question.
So HeLa cancer cells,
Yeah.
or cancer cells that were taken without consent from a woman 60 or so years ago, and then studied by pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies who made hundreds of millions of dollars by studying these cells. So using the records of the hospital, it was able to be found who the woman who had these cells taken from her, and now some of the family members of this woman are benefiting from some of the research that was done on them. But I think, so far as I know, the HeLa example is unique. Do you think it would be possible, or have you ever tried to find other people who either gave or had cell lines, cancer cells taken from them, HEC293 cells?
Exactly, that's what the example. So HEC293 is a fetus after abortion from a female in Netherlands, but the records were lost. I read an interview of the person that took the cells, and he said the records are lost. He doesn't know who is this female that had a baby. It could be done using GEDmatch, something that, this is something that can be done. I'm not sure it's even very complicated. The only complication is we don't have good coverage of the Dutch population as for the US population. but something can be used to identify. Now, it reminds me another thing that I want to say. You said it's unique, Hila, and I don't think it's unique at all. This is the new common rule. The common rule is the rule that HHS regulates all human subject research. This is when you go to Cold Spring Harbor IRB, and they read a common rule and need to adhere to the common rule before they give permission for researchers to conduct human subject research. Now, the new common rule, the common rule was like, I think, was put together 20 years ago. And then about 5 years ago, they had discussions to switch because all the new advancements and changes of notions of privacy. So they decided to kind of like put a new framework for the common rule. And they asked people, do you think biospecimens such as these cell lines should be considered human subject research or not? And most people said, in most comments that I got was that they should not be considered as human subjects. And genomic information, according to the common rule, the new one that's going to be in effect in January 2019, states that genomic information is not identifiable. I think it's comical, given all the evidence that we have already, how you can identify people. And it means that you can take leftover material from clinics without consent of people and do some research because it's not human subject and you cannot link it back to the person. Whereas we know that it's not that complicated to go back and using GEDmatch and link to individuals. Yeah, question over there?
Would you discuss the value and the necessity for mitochondrial DNA testing?
Yeah, mitochondria is this piece of genome, that tiny piece outside of the nucleus, about 15,000 base pairs, that people inherit from their mother. And their mother got it from her mother, and her mother got it from her mother, and so on. This allows individuals to look, allows individual to look at their maternal line and just trace one part of their family, just the mothers. I think you can get, it's nice, you can get some information about the specific line in your family. It can be quite in many cases, in some cases there is a mismatch between the self-reported identity or ethnic group of the person versus the mitochondria. I give you my own example. My mitochondrial data, if you trace it, it's about 500 years ago, came from the Horn of Africa. Now, I'm on my father's side, I'm Ashkenazi. On my mother's side, I'm from the Jewish community in Uzbekistan. I asked, what's Uzbekistan and the Horn of Africa? What's the connection here? So I actually traced and I did more tests. And I found that I'm a product, my mother, and so on. She probably was, there was a slave trade between the Horn of Africa and this place in Pakistan called Makharan. There was a slave trade about 500 years ago. And I guess that the mother of my mother, it was one of these slaves, and she probably, her descendants migrated to Uzbekistan and eventually incorporated with the Jewish community over there. But if you look at my entire autosomal ethnicity, I don't have any African ethnicity or genetic markers that are usually unique to African population. So my mitochondria is quite unique in that regard. Gives you another dimension, I think, kind of fuller story. Yeah.
How's it going? There's a lot of services kind of getting at the same information, which is obviously genetic material. Yeah. I'm curious what you think about standardizing a privacy policy in terms of service for pretty much everybody in the genomics ecosystem, and kind of along with that introducing sort of an information metabolism that regulates everybody's activity?
When you say regulates, no, it depends. Most of the services are very similar in terms of use. The only exception here is really GEDmatch. I would say most services, they don't, even if they license your data to a pharma company, as 23andMe did, they don't give your individual level data. You just pull your data as part of summary statistics and give the results. So kind of they pull your genome with 100,000 other genomes and just give statistics about each allele. And I think this is quite similar for other services. The real outlier here is GEDmatch. Now, I think this project is amazing, really. I have a lot of respect. These two individuals, Curtis, that is the leader of GEDmatch, just celebrated his 80th birthday. This is not some young entrepreneur from grad school in Silicon Valley. This is a person that has full life, other things that he does, very active person, and runs also this website. They have the philosophy that genealogy should be open, that you should give people access and all the records. In fact, in GEDmatch, it's not just that if you upload DNA, you don't see only your results. Now you can click on each one of your matches. Let's say that you match me. I can click on your profile, see who you match. And then I can click another profile. It's an endless process. They believe in something like that. The community likes it. So I don't think I want to see like regulation on how to run websites where the community thinks this is the right way. Each data custodian should develop its own policies.
But don't you think you could develop a better policy than, say, 23andMe? Because, I mean, there's a lot of disorder there, so I'm wondering if it's done from the bottom up. Say Cold Spring Harbor was to come up for a shared policy, a shared sort of information metabolism software form for everybody to kind of delve into, and then create permissions for that.
I think it's something that probably should be done, in the government level. I don't think government usually regulate businesses this way of this information. What you usually kind of like the philosophy of the US government is to prevent harm, not to prevent privacy or identification. So Gina is a good example. Like if something can go wrong, at least you know that it cannot go wrong in healthcare or in employment, or at least if it goes wrong, you can sue them. So I don't kind of like think that you can really regulate these services from the bottom up as you suggested. We try now to work with these companies on these cryptographic signature strategies, and we really hope that all labs will support that. And this is something that we just initiated the discussions, and we'll see how it unfolds in the next few months. Question over there. Just give her the first, yeah.
Yaniv, the companies that you mentioned that are active in this space, the beneficiary of that information is largely the consumer, right? Who's submitting their DNA. Mm-hmm. So they're getting something in return that they want. You talked a little bit about the need for people to submit their DNA for research purposes. That's not the same thing as signing up for one of these company programs. How do you go about finding out where you could submit your DNA for research?
My answer has several parts. The first part is that in most of these companies, including MyHeritage and 23andMe, you can check another box and say, I want to participate in research. And this allows us now to share your data under very strict rules with outside researchers that we carefully vet. And we also don't give your individual level data. We pull your data and give it as kind of like a bucket with many, many other data sets, so it's indistinguishable. So that's like one way. Another way, we put together a website called DNA.land, where if you were tested with one of the direct-to-consumer companies, and this is my academic lab, not at MyHeritage. If you were tested with one of these companies, you can download your data and upload your data to DNA Land for the public good. And we actually run a study with the National Breast Cancer Coalition. So you can upload your data to DNA Land and say, I want to participate in a study for breast cancer. And now they will get these data sets and can disseminate them for researchers that they carefully vet that work on breast cancer research.
I have one more question from looking possibly at the faux aspect of it. Mm-hmm. At what point do you foresee, first of all, are these companies primarily for-profit or are any of them not-for-profit? And second of all, Facebook knows everything about me. It sends me ads when it wants to. If I tried to disengage from Facebook, I would probably get warning signs the day before I even did it because they would figure out I want to disconnect. At what point down the road am I going to be getting ads for health checkups and for dyeing my hair and for, at what point in 10 years are these companies going to know more about me than I want to know?
Yeah. The first thing is that nearly all these companies in this domain are for-profit. So I mentioned Ancestor is for-profit, 23andMe, MyHeritage, GEDmatch, FTDNA. DNA Land, the database I mentioned that my academic group runs, it's a not-for-profit. It's part of Columbia University. Now, all these companies, the for-profit companies that I mentioned, about 3 months ago, we signed and some sort of like an agreement or an MOU or a declaration, whatever you want to call it, with it's called the Future of Privacy Forum, of kind of like a set of rules that we're going to adhere to them. And one of the rules is that we will never use their genetic information for ads or marketing. So you should not see any ad to do this or that the same way that you see with Facebook. And also, this is not really the model that we have. The predictive power of genomics is not that strong for most of the many things. And our model is really about kind of like hook you to genealogy, and now you want to learn about your family history, so we have some historical records that we want you to maybe tap into and learn more. This is the model that we operate, not the model of serving you ads.
Yeah, but you also weren't planning on catching criminals when you started.
That's totally fair. But
the future takes us where.
That's fair point, but at MyHeritage we don't allow the police to search our database. This is GEDmatch, and they did allow that from the
An industry as a whole.
Yeah, as a whole. Yeah.
I mean, you bought Genie.com, right?
Genie.com.
You have the largest
Yeah.
database. That's what the marketer persuaded me to buy the
Yeah,
kit. And
terrific.
they can come down in price. If you stay on hold long enough with them, you can figure down the price.
I need to somehow get my salary at the end of the month. Yeah, we have very good offers, and we can discuss that in a different. Yeah.
Do you become a monopoly the way?
I don't think we'll be like. That's the thing. First, like, of course, I wish we were the largest in the market. Ancestry is the largest company in the market. Yeah, Ancestry has way more DNA tests than us. And they have 5 years over us, right? We started 2 years ago. They started in 2012 to 11 even to sell these kits. But it's totally fair to say, GEDmatch didn't plan that. I think this is why it's so important that the Future of Privacy Forum put all these companies together. We signed that, and that's, I think, a very good thing for the community. And plus, I want to say another thing. This paper that we published in Science a week ago about the Golden State Killer, this is for MyHeritage. This is not for my academic lab. This was done with MyHeritage data, with the blessing of the CEO and the board. And this is quite unique for a company to go and kind of like tell you about the privacy gaps that it and the community has. Because I think kind of like our thinking is that we don't want to be like Facebook, that it was written on the wall for 5 years that you can meddle the elections, and they were like, yeah, it'll be fine, and then oops, we get these like bots now all over Facebook. We want to be proactive. It's early on in the process, and the horses are still at the barn, right? So this is why we want to promote these cryptographic signatures. We think it can protect individuals. Yes.
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of that last question, it sounds like you need fairly sophisticated techniques to try to identify these people. So I was wondering, aside from like governmental surveillance, what other privacy concerns do you really have with kind of the identifiability that comes along with sharing your DNA?
I think it's kind of like, in the future, it will become easier and easier, right? Because the prices, as you mentioned here, they're going down, and every year you get a better price because the supply chain is getting better, technologies are getting better. So there will be a point that many people who have genetic information, it'll be very cheap to get the genetic information from different material. Then you can think about, from hacktivists that are trying to identify research subjects to make a point and to create some damage to the institute. It can be some people that, it can be the police, but not for reasons that we really want them to identify people, right? We are totally cool with the Golden State Killer being, subject to this technique. Are we cool with, let's say, political demonstration? And now, someone sips, takes a sip from a cup, leaves it, and now the police can know who is this person using this technique? Well, less cool with that, probably. So you can also kind of like the proliferation of this technique to other domains in policing, not just like violent crimes. That's a concern. But again, my biggest concern, foreign players. That's the biggest concern.
All right, we'll have a few questions and then we should wrap it up. So there's one there, and then up the back.
Okay, yeah.
About a year ago, there was a big push in New York to start initiating familial DNA with regard to violent crimes. And from my understanding, from just what I was following, it was basically saying that it would also allow police to use their own database, so their own criminal database, the DNA that they already have, and use it through the same process that you use to see if they could identify criminals that way. Is that correct? So they would use also their own?
No, not exactly. So the familial searches that the police conduct can only identify first-degree relatives. Or maybe in some rare cases, second degree if you're really lucky. That cannot go to a third cousin that is something like 8th degree relative of someone. So it's much weaker technique. Second, in most cases, regular familial searches with forensic databases are tightly regulated by certain rules. So in California, for instance, you have to apply for a special committee to get permission to search the forensic database for relatives, for first degree relatives. GEDmatch is free for all. If they get the results as SNP array, a genotyping result, like a genotyping array. They can upload, there is no regulation, there is nothing. They can use it as because each one of you can use it.
So why aren't more?
Too new to put a regulation. It's like, it's so new and that they didn't have time to put a regulation. Regulation takes a lot of time. If you want to pass some legislation, this will take now years.
Right, well, since it's not regulated, why aren't more violent crimes being investigated that way?
Oh, it's like we have already, within 6 months. And this is the police. It's not this is not a startup company. They still have their own. It takes some time. 20 cases were solved. And we talk about cases that they worked, they took the first, the hardest cases, the one that consumed most of their energy, violent crimes. They also captured it's called the North California killer or something like that. Someone really awful person using this technique. So it's making its success, every few weeks now you hear about another success. It also takes some time. After you get the match, it's not always oh, okay, you get a third cousin, so you know who is the person. You need to do a lot of investigation, a lot of build these large family trees to get to the person. But I think to see within 6 months, to see 20 cases solved, it's this is really mind-blowing.
Question up the back.
You've been going back and looking at DNA, but what about going forward? What about issues of people trying to find a mate that would produce an intelligent child, or governments trying to find mates to produce super soldiers or something of that nature?
So that's called eugenics, and I think we tried that and didn't work so well. It didn't end up,
With DNA, it's different.
No, it's actually, I would say that first, here is the truth is that DNA is not a good, for many traits, it predicts, but it's not a good predictor. Let's take longevity, for instance, right? Let's say that you want to find a mate that will live long life with you, right? DNA, we know, explains only 15% of the variance of heritability in the population. It's nothing, and this is with perfect knowledge, as if you got the book from God, nature, whatever you want to call it. You got the book that tells you what is the value of each variant in the genome. If you got the book, you only can predict 15%. So now with the current knowledge that we have, it's really bad. Same thing for many other traits that you mentioned, right? Like intelligence. We know only fraction of what's going on in the DNA, and even in the future, we are bounded by what's called the heritability of a trait, which for intelligence, it's something about can be 50% or something like that. But I think people do that already naturally today, right? You go to a college and you when your mate selection computes also who is this person, where he or she came from, and all of that. So it's not unique, DNA is not exceptional over here.
I can say this standing next to Yaniv. Height is probably one of the most complicated genetic things. There's probably about 1,000 genes that contribute to height. And they all, if you tried to design somebody for height, it's just unbelievably complicated. So
and also many
it's just completely random.
Yeah, and also many of these variants, easy for you to say, many of these variants are actually, if they can contribute for one trait, but negatively contribute to a different trait, that it might be also important, right? It can be that a certain variant that increases, let's say, your risk for one disease will reduce the risk for other disease. So to balance between these things, extremely complicated. But people screen, we have screening programs for rare genetic diseases, such as cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs. This is not unheard of in genetics.
All right, we'll take one more question from a student.
I have a follow-up question. So is it possible to increase accuracy of finding DNA by using artificial intelligence or neural network in the future?
Say again, to use artificial intelligence to use what?
Increase accuracy by using artificial intelligence or neural networks.
Yeah. So we actually try to do something with neural nets with DNA, and the thing is, it seems that linear models are quite robust and they do the job. And there was actually a paper in genetics about 2 months ago that tried to do neural nets on DNA and to predict traits, and it didn't show any better prediction than standard, not a standard, but slightly sophisticated linear model. And the reason for that, since you're a grad student, it goes back to the days of Ronald Fisher that looked at DNA. And the model of Fisher is that most of the variants are additive in the genome. They create additive heritability. Additivity means that if you have a linear model, you get very good predictions. So this is the reason why linear models seems to work pretty well, and you don't need to go so sophisticated for neural nets. At least this is the current, what we know in the field.
So one of the reasons why we do these public lectures is because we would really like an educated population to make societal decisions, and I hope that you've been educated tonight. And there's a lot of food for thought there, so thank you very much, Yaniv.
Thank you.